Well, we had the rally on the Nasdaq to the 78.6 Fibonacci that I talked about over the weekend, in the S&P to new highs to complete that divergence that we talked about. Show you those charts again. Had Fed Chair Powell with a Q&A. First, I want to take a moment to remember the man that was killed in the at the Trump rally this weekend and those that have been hospitalized. My thoughts and prayers are for their family, those that are still with us that have been in the hospital, for President Trump, his family, surviving this horrible event to attempt to take his life. I'm so glad that more people weren't hurt. And we wish President Trump and those that were injured a speedy recovery. And the gentleman that lost his life in order to shield his daughter and family from harm's way. This gentleman, 50 years old, lost his life. It's so sad. Ex-fire chief. And I hope I don't butcher his name, but take a moment to acknowledge this man, this innocent victim, shielding his daughter, and now daughter no longer has him. It's just so sad. His name is Corey Comparator, if I'm saying that right. I apologize if I'm butchering his name there. I died a hero. Just so sad. And those that are still with us in the hospital and President Trump, I wish them all a speedy recovery. Just so glad that President Trump's wife and children didn't end up losing him, as this other gentleman's family did. Just so sad. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those victims, the gentleman that gave his life for his family, really, and to wish President Trump a quick recovery with his injuries and those that are still in the hospital with injuries. Over the weekend that on Friday we got this red bar on the oscillator with that topping tail, but we bounced off the 10 period, and I told you we can still go back up. 78.6 Fibonacci. We did move into the golden pocket. We got another topping tail. We got to take out the 10, take out the 20 here, the blue line, and see a momentum shift with the reversal of conditions. If we take out the lower boundary of the cloud here, we'll flip the cloud to red and either get a correction or start a reversal. I'll be watching that. The MACD did roll over here today, so we now have the divergence complete there. We get it rolling over on the S&P. Nasdaq, again, let me just say this. Again, with these divergences, it's either done with Nasdaq and we start getting a bigger sell-off. If we do get a bigger sell-off, you can go back to the 17,000 area and the 200 and get your head and shoulders. If we start getting a big sell-off, rebound back up for a right shoulder, if the top is in. Another possibility, as I've talked about, is if signals turn bearish but revert right back to bullish, you could still try to get a divergence on these awesome oscillators surrounding the Fed meeting July 31st. So do keep that in mind. If we start seeing signals go bearish, try to turn back up with the Fed. We'll be watching how it unfolds here. But our second red bar for the Nasdaq here, and again, stochastic is breaking the 80 level now. MACD is now rolling over. So we'll see if we lose the 10 period moving average here in the next day or two and flip momentum. I thought it would turn down for Tuesday, but I told you I thought there was a good chance that we would rally Powell and then sell off with Powell. That is what happened. Didn't flip the momentum signals. We didn't get a bigger sell off with Powell. We just went back and filled the gap at the open of the session. We start turning in the weekly time frame. I'll be watching for a red awesome oscillator bar in the MACD to eventually roll over. By the time that happens, we'll have a pretty significant sell off. By the time we see that MACD roll over, that weekly chart. Same thing with the S&P 500. Again, you've got these divergences going on here. Awesome oscillator, MACD. We'll be looking to see if they begin to play out this week. Do we get a red bar before the week ends? Or, again, do we start selling off? Again, we got a little bit of a topping tail last week on the weekly chart, but that bearish candlestick on the Nasdaq weekly chart, we'll be watching to see what becomes of the candlestick this week. If we get a big, ugly sell-off by the end of the week, you've got a possible, because we gapped higher, you got a possible bearish engulfing of the real body. We just see momentum flip if we're going to see any kind of sell-off here. Again, thought we'd rally. Think that the rally is going to be sold. So far, that is the case. Thought we'd go to new highs on S&P. Nasdaq make a lower high, and that is the case as well. We got a candle of indecision today. Again, the low topping tail. Now, we have two red bars on Nasdaq. We don't have any red bars here on S&P. I'll be watching to see if they start showing up, as I talked to you about on Friday. So we might start seeing them show up on Monday or Tuesday, because we did get it on Friday for Nasdaq. Nasdaq stochastic breaking the 80 level here. So we'll see if we start dropping and losing the 10-period moving average. Momentum is still bullish with the green cloud, the blue bars. If we start losing the 10, the bars flip to red, and the cloud flips to red. You start coming down and closing below the cloud, it will flip to red. You could see momentum begin to shift. We'll be watching, but I expected S&P go make a new high. Well, Nasdaq made a lower high. It's a case, and hit the 78.6 Fibonacci today, allowing S&P to go back and make another higher high. So I do think we could start seeing some selling. Same thing here. Again, do we start seeing red going into the Fed meeting and then turn back up and get a little divergence here? So if momentum starts going bearish and we start getting a sell, but then it turns back to bullish, then you can either get a lower high or a divergence here. Also very possible that we're setting up these head and shoulders. We start getting a sell-off like what we had with Bitcoin, that we start coming back down to this 4,900 area and the 200-period moving average. You can get something pretty ugly and start setting up that head and shoulders pattern. That is certainly possible if momentum flips and we stop making new highs. We need to see the momentum flip here, and we haven't seen that yet. But we did go higher as I thought. We'll see if the rally is sold, which I do believe that it will be sold. S&P daily chart here, I'll be watching for that red awesome oscillator bar, possibly coming in tomorrow or before the weekends, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you follow the link, it'll take you to a secured site. You can donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. If you do that, I thank you. Take a moment to support the channel today. I would really appreciate it. I get offers all the time to have sponsors to sell you a bunch of stuff to people's websites. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sell you stuff that you don't need. I ask that you support the channel if you can to help out, and I appreciate your consideration for that. Discrepancy. The VIX is making a higher low. The S&P made a higher high today and late last week. The VIX is now closing above the 50-period moving average. The VIX today closed up more than 5.25%, just above 13. I was listening to Powell closely, and the guy that was interviewing him seemed to think we were going to have a soft landing, and Powell seems to think that way again. Go watch a video I did over the weekend. We're not going to have this, soft landing. That's a fairy tale. Fed's policies lead to negative outcomes, period. The indicators that I showed over the weekend, I'll link the video at the end of this one. It's 20 minutes. I go through some of the recession indicators, major warning signs that we're about to have a recession. Powell was asked, well, a lot of the economists said that we are going to already have one. I asked about that today. The economists that have been predicting one, they should have been correct. Fed, with their monetary tightening going on, about in the video, you have the government offsetting it, running a $2 trillion deficit, huge amounts of government spending. And we saw that with the jobs report, that half the jobs are being created are government jobs at the moment. This last jobs report, seeing this huge amount of government spending, has delayed, but no amount of money can prevent a real legitimate recession from happening. You can delay it. It did with the stimulus checks and the QE infinity and beyond. You can delay it, recession from happening, but you can't stop it. It's still going to happen. And when it comes, it's only going to be worse. Had they just let it happen and suffered through the pain. I believe the Fed is going to lower rates in September. That means that we're probably going to witness a stock market top right about now with the negative divergences that we're seeing in the weekly and the monthly time frame. You've got the VIX closing above 50. If it can remain above the 50 level, then bad things will start happening on the S&P 500. Now, again, S&P doesn't set up the head and shoulders and we start seeing the VIX go higher but then come back down. It could be the S&P sells off and does this with the awesome oscillator, then goes down. That's certainly possible. But again, this is above the 50 level. If we see momentum shift this week, then signals will turn bearish. We'll see how long they stay bearish. If they can get a bigger sell-off like what Bitcoin did, if sell-off into the Fed meeting and then attempt some kind of recovery, we'll be watching. VIX closing above the 50-period moving average. The Bollinger Bands are tightening. And all these divergences in the weekly time frame, we're likely going to see them begin to play out. About it with the RSI at extremes. And again, we have this rising wedge going back to 2023. The June high over here. And again, negative divergence on the MACD. And it's on a lot of indicators. Got it with momentum here, which is marked turning points. We have it on a lot of indicators. Here we have it. Recently, we saw Nasdaq 100 make a new high last week on July 11th. We had NVIDIA peak back over here on the 20th of June. It has not made a new high. It made a lower high in the weekly time frame. We got the topping tail on both of them last week. We're watching to see if the topping tail is confirmed, and do we get a lower high, lower low on NVIDIA? If we do, see the divergence play out without making a new high like we did over here. We couldn't make a new high, got a lower high, then we got a sell-off. This time, rather than just a correction, do we start a reversal? Nasdaq can get a major reversal if NVIDIA does. Breaking down from the rising wedge with the MACD rolling over, seeing a triple negative divergence here with momentum with our peak last week there on Thursday. Saw the Nasdaq get a topping tail in the form of a candle of indecision. Again, the spinning top doji looking candlestick. We'll be watching to see what candlestick we get this week. Again, does a rally fail, we end up with a big ugly red bar. If you do, you have an evening star reversal on Nasdaq in the weekly time frame. If you get a big sell-off this week and we start seeing momentum shift soon as tomorrow, Nasdaq has some Class B divergences here. Again, on the RSI, the MACD. We'll be watching to see if they begin to roll over here. And again, we confirm last week's candle by the end of the week or not. It's the rising wedge breakdown on the daily chart, and we start moving towards the lower boundary in the 20-week here of this larger rising wedge here in the weekly time frame. Also over here, if we take the trend line going all the way back to the peak over here, you got an interesting resistance level of a channel here on the linear scaling for the Nasdaq weekly chart. And again, if we connect the low from the pandemic to these lows right here, you go up here and you have this peak, and you've got this parallel boundary to the lower boundary. And again, that's where we're just overthrowing that slightly here with the shadow that we had with the topping tail last week. I've been pointing out that Bitcoin is bottoming, and the S&P and Nasdaq are likely topping. They currently have a negative correlation. Bottoming process completed. Momentum began to shift over the weekend with Bitcoin. So again, we'll probably see the momentum begin, all the momentum signals begin to shift down for the Nasdaq, S&P 500. They usually have a longer term positive correlation. They have a negative correlation, but the bottom I've been talking about for the Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin, the bottoming signals played out and were confirmed on Saturday with the bar turning green and getting above the, or I should say, got the follow through. The confirmation bar came right there. Got the follow through here back above the 200 period. I've been calling for that, and I'll be watching this 100 period moving average. But again, I don't mean to bore you with Bitcoin. I'm just telling you that, again, it is suggesting that Bitcoin, when we had the sell signals back up June 6th through the 10th, trend signals turned right after that through the 10th through the 14th. Again, that the S&P and Nasdaq are likely going to follow Bitcoin's lead. The Bitcoin just could be in a counter trend. The longer term trend right now for Bitcoin is a downtrend, primary trend. This is a counter trend, short-term trend, until proven otherwise. Got to get back above the 100, be able to stay above it and turn the weekly charts back to bullish. S&P and Nasdaq are likely going to flip their weekly charts very soon and follow Bitcoin's lead lower. But because Bitcoin is attempting a rebound, we'll see if the S&P and Nasdaq start selling off like they did in 2022 and getting something like this. This is a 27.5% sell-off with Bitcoin. It's the asset that has the most volatility, so it usually peaks first. When we had this happen in 2022, the S&P followed Bitcoin after the January 2022 top for S&P, and it dropped 15% in about 6 or 7 weeks or so. So Bitcoin surging here on a Monday and Sunday, and the turn talked about on Saturday again had happened. Got confirmation of this reversal. So we'll see. And the bullish signals here, complete opposite to what we're seeing on the Nasdaq. I told you on Friday we got a topping tail over the weekend. In the weekend video, we got a topping tail there, but it's either going to get confirmed and we're going to start going down. We're going to go, we're pulling back and we're going to go up and hit that 78.6 Fibonacci. We went right up and we hit it right on the nose. Again, I'm getting these warning signals on Nasdaq here that a top has likely been put in. We need to see the momentum flip. We need to see red bars and the red momentum line. The doji bar that we got today was red. Okay, and again, I expect, as I told you, in all likelihood, we're going to see Monday or Tuesday the momentum flipping here was what we talked about over the weekend, and the divergence begin to play out here with momentum. So again, the Nasdaq and S&P doing what I thought it would do. The S&P moving higher, Nasdaq making a lower high in the golden pocket. We talked about this at great length and detail last week, and again, I'll show you the chart. But I told you, watch that 78.6 Fibonacci. We went up and we hit it today right on the nose. Another topping tail here with the doji. And I think these signals are going to go ahead and play out. The last set we got over here just gave us a corrective move. This is probably going to give us a reversal in all likelihood if we start seeing it flip the trend signals here in the next few days. We'll see if that happens. But I do expect, again, the momentum is likely going to flip tomorrow. I thought it would flip today or tomorrow. Powell, we had a rally ahead of Powell, and then we sold off with Powell closing near the lows of the session, but moving off of them the last half hour of trading. I am getting a warning sign in the weekly chart on the Nasdaq 100 that we might see a top here. Again, at this time, it's just a warning sign. We'll see what becomes of it. The weekly chart, last week we got the candle of indecision. We'll be looking to see if we get a big ugly red bar by the end of the week. If we do, we'll have an evening star reversal on the Nasdaq here in the weekly time frame, which is a wide range bar. The candle of indecision here in the form of the spinning top, and then a big ugly red bar. We'll see what happens. The same warning sign on the S&P 500 that a possible top is forming with this weekly bar. When a top forms, a candlestick top forms, sometimes you get a warning sign before or after or with. Right now, it's with this bar, at least so far. Told you last week when Nasdaq got that reversal with the CPI that I thought the S&P would go up and make a new high. It did on Friday, and I told you it still may not be done. It did again today, as we talked about the 78.6 Fibonacci being reached for the Nasdaq 100. Happened today. So again, I think that the Nasdaq is likely peaked. I think the S&P is going to follow it, but same is true here. We've got divergences on indicators like momentum here, but the red bars and the momentum line turning into bearish. I told you I thought we'd see that probably Monday or Tuesday. And at Monday, we went higher with Powell, had a Powell, and then sold off with Powell. These little topping tails, the higher high on the S&P and the lower high on Nasdaq, they're diverging. I talked about that over the weekend. If you didn't catch my video on the recession, I went through some of the recession indicators. They're all flashing that a recession is about to happen. And again, we have Powell today. The Fed lowered the amount of estimate for the rate cuts. Again, I believe that the Fed is likely going to cut in September. The markets also believe that at this time. Again, while they believed that there was going to be 7 cuts earlier in the year, it's out of touch with reality. I think they are going to be correct right now. I believe that we're going to get the September cut. I think we'll have a sell-off, rally ahead of Powell, and then we had a sell-off. I think we're going to get a sell-off here. We are starting to see some sell signals show up on the S&P 500, but we need momentum and the bars to change to red if we're going to see a correction or a reversal. We have the S&P and Nasdaq diverging. I think Nasdaq and S&P are likely going to start following Bitcoin lower. Bitcoin has bottomed and rebound, but again, it's still in a primary downtrend. It can get back above the 100 period moving average. I think the S&P is likely going to come down and take out the 100 period moving average right here. If it does, you got a shot at a head and shoulders formation, as I've talked about. And I talked about this. I told you we could rally ahead of Powell and sell off with Powell. That ended up happening. That flipped the signals to the momentum signals to bearish time frame. But again, you're getting these warning signs in the 60-minute time frame for the S&P 500. We had the divergence over here give us this peak right here, and then we came back up, and we've now formed this another divergence on indicators. Now, this gray shaded area is telling us something big is getting ready about to happen here. We have momentum flip. We had rallied ahead of Powell and then sold off with Powell and then moved off of the lows at the very end of the session. This is a 60-minute chart here, getting some warning signs that a turn might happen. And now we're seeing towards the last 3 hours of trading, or 2.5 hours of trading there, that the momentum bars on the hourly turned bearish, and so did that. We did get a little bottoming tail on the 60-minute chart. So again, it didn't flip the trend signals, so I'll be watching to see, do we start breaking down? But the shaded area here is suggesting something big is getting ready to happen, and we formed the divergence that we talked about. We had one right here, and I told you Be done yet. Nasdaq could still go up and hit that 78.6 Fibonacci, and S&P can still make a new high, and that did happen. Let me just show you some really interesting charts. Before I do, again, momentum is turning negative, and we're seeing momentum signals here turn bearish. So again, we'll see if that continues on tomorrow, but we are trying to get a bottoming tail here for the short term on the 60-minute chart. S&P 500 60-minute chart. After the CPI sell-off, I told you S&P is likely going to go make a new high, and the Nasdaq is probably going to get a lower high. After the CPI sell-off, we formed those inverse head and shoulder patterns, and they played out. I told you that we'd likely rebound back up and go make a new high on the S&P, and we did. Formed the peak here, had the sell-off, and we're starting to see distribution now. Distribution late last Friday. Distribution ahead of Powell here, or with Powell, just ahead of his Q&A. It had started, and then a feeble rebound, and then more selling. We did get a bottoming tail there after coming back and filling the gap right here. We came back and we had a gap higher today. We had this channel, tried to break out of it, got rejection at the 50, and then came back to the gap fill. So we'll be watching. Do we go back up and try to test this high, or do we start breaking down and start taking out today's low and the rising wedge that's developing? But I wanted to show you this, and again, I told you here again I was looking for higher if we better define that divergence on the 60-minute chart and the 15-minute chart. Let me just show you those. We talked about it over the weekend, but keeping this divergence in mind here, watching to see this rally to see if we get another reference point or not. We got a lower high at least so far. And this sell-off with Powell here gave us the topping tails today on Nasdaq and S&P. Talked about the 15-minute chart over the weekend, and again, we turned back up to get this divergence on the RSI and the MACD, gapping higher, but then turning down, and here we are trying to get a bottoming tail, again, filling the gap and hitting the cloud. We'll see what becomes of this. We'll see if this high holds or not. May not be done yet, but again, getting pretty close because we got the divergences here and also in the 60-minute time frame. But really nice looking negative divergences here on the price oscillator and the MACD and the RSI here in the 15-minute time frame. Bottoming tail at the end of the session there. See if we build upon that or not. 15-minute chart here, multiple point divergences. Same thing going on here in the 30-minute chart. So again, this very well could be done with our peak. And again, we got these topping tails here on the 30-minute chart, here on the 60-minute chart. These topping tails rallying ahead of Powell, and then we sold off. Filling the gap, we're trying to rebound there, so we'll see what happens here on the 60-minute chart. Again, this may be the peak here today, or we may get one more push and then have it. We'll see what happens. We are in earnings season, a lot of earnings now until just after the Fed meeting. As we move into early August, we'll be getting a lot of earnings now in early August, a boatload of earnings. But these divergences that I talked about over the weekend, again, I told you we might get a divergence here, which we did do that, but I told you it may not be done yet. We may still see another reference point. Still may not be done yet if we don't see momentum shift yet, and that's why I took the time to show you momentum on the daily chart here. Momentum, we would have to take out the momentum line here on the 60-minute chart, the purple line, the momentum cloud, which we're trying to bounce off of, and we closed above the momentum line, the purple line, and this other line is the 20-period moving average. So again, we're trying to bounce there. We'll see if we go up and try to get one more push higher or not. And form a divergence right here in the most recent price action on the MACD and the RSI, or is that it? Is that all she wrote? But you now have a triple divergence here on the MACD and the topping tail there. So we'll see if we start breaking down. And again, you got the topping tail in the 60-minute time frame. You got the topping tail in the daily chart. Does that mark a short-term top? And we got one on Friday too. So in the daily time frame. So we're getting a series of topping tail. There's sellers up at these levels. That's what it's telling us. If we come down here and start to saw off, moving towards the 200, which I think we're likely going to do, you've got this head and shoulders pattern. S&P was up 0.28% higher. It was up by 16 points. Had a bigger rally with that topping tail. I told you I was looking for a move, possibly going right into this trend line right here. We went and we just slightly overthrew it. If we are not done yet, I've drawn a trend line here excluding the shadow right here with this level right there. And the parallel boundary would take us just a little bit higher should this move not be done yet. But again, we have divergences now complete here on the RSI. It could give us a reversal right here and right now, unless it's Get another reference point, we go get one more push. So I've drawn that trend line, and here you can see the MACD rolling over in the really nice looking divergence right here. So again, been watching this channel and hit the upper boundary, the red upper boundary of this channel. We hit the line there on the daily chart. Now I've excluded the shadows on the daily chart. I mean, I've connected this point here and this point here, and you've got a rising wedge in the daily time frame. Before I was taking it further back, and now I'm just taking it from the more recent lows. Again, I'm going to be looking for a turn, going back down to the 200 here, back down to the trend lines here, including the shadow or excluding the shadow. We'll be watching 200 period. If we start breaking down immediately, I think we will see these signals begin to play out. And the MACD is now rolling over. You know, the MACD rolled over today in the daily time frame for Nasdaq. We'll see if we get that with the S&P before the week ends. Push up into the trend line on the S&P 500. Again, here's this connecting this point and this point, which that's not the channel I have on the 60-minute chart, but just connecting the more steeper, connecting the dots with the more steeper trend line here. Still have a rising wedge. Again, we got the topping tail in the form of a shooting star there on Friday. I told you candlesticks are meaningless unless they're confirmed. I told you if the Nasdaq still pushed up higher, S&P could. We got a spinning top. We've got a divergence going on here on the RSI. MACD's moved to a new high, but it's not rolled over yet. We did get it rolling over on Nasdaq. We'll be watching the MACD, watching to see if we start to break down from this level. You've got your rising trend line and your 20-period moving average, or your 10-period moving average right on there on the trend line. Right on the trend line there, a little hard to see, but again, I'll be watching these levels. Another little topping tail in the form of a spinning top. Completing a divergence on the RSI here in the daily time frame for S&P. And again, talked about S&P going higher on that 60-minute chart. Let me just show you the close-up on that. That's a really good chart. Because with this sell-off, again, just as I mentioned this a moment ago, I told you with this sell-off, it could be, we see the S&P move to a higher high or a lower high. If we, and a higher high if we go back and hit that 78.6 Fibonacci on Nasdaq, which we did do. S&P's moved to a new high today, got a topping tail on the 60-minute chart, while Nasdaq got a lower high. And again, I think Nasdaq is likely peaked along with NVIDIA on June 20th. And again, I've been talking about the Nasdaq having possibly peaked last week on July 11th. Remember, we got that CPI sell-off with the Nasdaq, and here it is on the 60-minute chart. I told you I thought Nasdaq would get a rebound back up, but probably this high is going to hold while the S&P would move higher because NASDAQ and S&P often diverge at turning points. Told you right here, again, if this is a peak and we did get a rebound back up, we start to get that big ugly red bar, start to get distribution there late Friday, the last half hour there of trading. Told you it may be that we get an ABC type move and still go up to 78.6 Fibonacci, and look at that peak of stink and boo right on the nose. 78.6 Fibonacci, and what do we get? A topping tail, a shooting star. So again, people are looking at the Fibonacci retracements here of this move. Sellers pounced on it, but we are seeing the distribution with the Nasdaq here. We're getting it here, got it here late Friday. We got it there with the CPI sell-off, and we got it here today. We're seeing some distribution take place. My guess is a lower high is setting up. We still may have it go up here and get a lower high now. Still see S&P try to go higher a little bit, but I do think a topping process is done. It's what I'm going to be watching for. Is again the momentum line to turn red in the daily time frame and the bars in the daily time frame. We start getting that, and we start getting a sell-off, then you got a good shot at getting a lower high and a lower low, and then we'll be watching. You got this little miniature head and shoulders. Got a larger one on the daily chart, but you get this little miniature one on the hourly chart. If we start heading back to the 200 and overthrow it, moving back towards the 19,500 area. So again, nice divergence, possible confirmation of a lower high at our 78.6 Fibonacci with our topping tail today. So everything playing out as I said and thought that it would. S&P moving higher, Nasdaq hitting the lower high in the golden pocket, and I told you again over the weekend video, probably have a good shot of the 78.6 Fibonacci being reached. And we talked about these divergences and so forth. So again, we'll be watching. Right now, we've dropped below the 50-period moving average, and we're losing, or trying to lose, I should say, coming down to the lower end of the cloud. And If we start dropping down further, we take out this low, you're going to have a lower high, lower low, and start moving down towards the 200. We'll be watching. Does the MACD start going back into the negative region tomorrow or on Wednesday? Do we stop making new highs? Again, I think you got a really good chance of a peak here for Nasdaq as these signals begin to turn, and then momentum signals and the trend signals after that. Going back to the S&P channel here for just a moment. Again, we hit the trend line, the upper boundary, ahead of Powell, and then we started to turn ahead of Powell's speech, Q&A I should say, and we saw momentum begin to roll over. It could still form a divergence. We did get a divergence right here, but you may get one in the most recent price action. So again, I'll be watching. Do we hover around this area, or again, the trend line above it if we exclude the shadow here? But again, momentum, for what it's worth, it did roll over. We'll see if that starts giving us a push down or not, which kind of get us soft. We got to take out the 10-period moving averages we bounced off of there on Friday. The MACD on the S&P 500 is not rolled over yet. It's moved to a new high. RSI is forming this divergence. May or may not be done yet, but you get this rising wedge as well in the channel on the 60-minute chart. Let's look at the MACD on the Nasdaq. And here it is. The MACD is rolling over today. So we'll be watching to see if that starts playing out for the balance of the week or not. And the stochastic has lost the 80 level here with our recent sell-off from the highs here. We're below the 80 level here on the stochastic, and the MACD now rolling over. We do have a possible confirmation of a lower high on the RSI. Here we had a divergence, but it was really almost two equal peaks, a Class B divergence. Indicator makes two equal peaks and price moves higher. Class A divergence is where it would have made a lower high like it did with momentum. You got a topping tail again here in the daily time frame, shooting star right at the 10 period, right at the trend line. Now we went a little bit higher to the 78.6 Fibonacci, and what do you get? Another topping tail. I told you that might happen. Go up and hit that 78.6 Fibonacci, but the sell off with Powell. We did that. Rally ahead of Powell and then sold off with Powell during the Q&A. We have a rising wedge here in the daily time frame, the channel in the 60-minute time frame. And going back to these lows, I'm just taking the more recent lows and forming this rising wedge and the possible head and shoulders pattern here in play. If we start breaking down from the trend line and start dropping below the 10 period, start getting a reversal of conditions on the Nasdaq and the S&P 500. The candlesticks in the daily time frame have to be confirmed with closes below them, and then you get a follow-through. Otherwise, those candlesticks are meaningless. We know that distribution is going on, but it may not be done yet. Have this channel here. Again, I think S&P or Nasdaq's likely peak. We're going to get a lower high, maybe at that 78.6 Fibonacci that I talked about and predicted we move up to is it. Still may overthrow it, but again, here on the Nasdaq 100, you've got the channel. Watching if we start to get the lower high, lower low, do we come down towards that trend line and the lower channel line there? If we rally further, watch that 78.6 Fibonacci and today's topping tail here on the 60-minute chart. CD go negative, or does it firm up at the center line? We'll be watching. Did get little bottoming tails on the 60-minute charts at the very end of the session, so we'll be watching to see what becomes of that. Candlesticks are meaningless also unless they're confirmed. So we'll be watching. Continue forming a counter trend here, or attempt to try to take out the high, or do we complete the counter trend and start moving down and getting a lower high, lower low?